Kelly saying in a statement that, quote, George Carlin in that video is not the beautiful human who defined his generation and raised me with love. It is a poorly executed facsimile cobbled together by unscrupulous individuals to capitalize on the extraordinary goodwill my father established with his adoring fan base. And this is there are claims that this special was actually not made by AI, or with a spokesperson for Will Sasso telling the New York Times that Dudesy is a fictional podcast character created by two humans, and that the Carlin special was, quote, completely written by Chad Klutgen. Though Klutgen's team didn't confirm that to the Times, nor was there any clarification about how Carlin's voice was made. But notably there, the complaint actually notes that whether the special was fully AI, just use AI-powered tools, or whatever, it does not matter because it was promoted and presented as AI-generated and claiming to have resurrected George Carlin with the technology. And really, I think this is just one example of a growing situation. With AI, we are seeing a new wave of lawsuits, and notably, the results of these lawsuits are largely going to determine what this whole fucking landscape looks like in the coming years. But as we wait to see how this plays out, how do you think it should? Like, do you think the George Carlin estate is in the right here, or do you agree with the argument that this is just a different version of parody? Or like I've seen some Dudesy fans saying, what's the difference between what we saw with the AI special and if Will Sasso just like put on a wig and tried to do his best George Carlin impersonation? Or do you think that holds water, or is that bullshit? And then let's talk about our douchebag of the day. A guy who's been described as the most vile, worthless, scummiest shitbag pieces of trash to ever grace the glorious state of Washington. His name is Ashton Connor Garcia. He is 21 years old, and for each year that he's been on this planet, he has swatted at least one person. With him from June of 2022 to March of 2023, making over 20 swatting calls to police in several U.S. states and Canada. With him making false bomb claims, making allegations of murder, rape, and kidnapping. And in many of those cases, heavily armed police entered the place that he targeted with their guns drawn. And all of that now leading him to plead guilty to 4 felony charges. With his indictment saying that he treated the calls like entertainment, explaining that he often broadcasted them on Discord to encourage others to watch and participate. And more specifically, sometimes he threatened to swat female victims if they didn't send nude photos of their parents' credit card information. And as far as the time he's going to serve, we're not going to know until April, though we know that prosecutors have agreed to recommend no more than 4 years in prison. And while I know there are going to be some watching that are going to be like, that's not enough time, at the very least, it is important that we see people be held accountable for shit like this, because we are continuing to see more and more of this, especially compared to a decade ago. And I mean, we're seeing it in all avenues of life, with some of the most recent examples being like earlier this month, there was a swatting campaign directed at public officials in charge of ballot access and voting, where you had authorities having to evacuate or lock down several state capitol buildings following bomb threats. So I will say, personally, I do think that the penalties for doing this need to be greater. When we're talking about someone swatting someone else, I don't see that as harassment. I see a lot of these situations as attempted murder. You're sending a group of armed people to a place. You're telling them that something horrible happened. It's fucking game on. And the only fucking saving grace in these situations having the authorities actually having some trigger finger discipline. We've seen cases in the past where that didn't happen and someone got fucking shot and killed. As far as I'm concerned, the swatting is the firing of a weapon. And we either make a bigger deal about holding people accountable, or there's no reason you should expect any sort of change in behavior. And I mean, that's not even taking into account the extortion we talked about with this situation. And then I gotta say that one of the things that makes a good night's sleep for me is my bed. More specifically, the sheets on my bed. There's nothing like crawling into the most comfortable sheets I've ever experienced. Like, you need these in your life type of comfort. And thanks to today's sponsor, Cozy Earth, this is the brand giving you the softest, most luxurious feeling fabric guaranteed. I'm not kidding. You don't love Cozy Earth sheets? You have 100 days to get your money back. But also, I can't imagine you not loving these, and you won't stop there. Their athleisure products is like taking the bed with you during your day. They feel as soft and cozy as the sheets, made with viscose from bamboo. And get this, both Cozy Earth apparel and sheets are naturally temperature regulating and moisture wicking, so you'll stay more comfortable year round. And coming from someone who runs hot, that is a great selling point. Plus, Cozy Earth prides themselves on the ethical production of all their products, and the durable fabric doesn't pill even after continual washing and drying. They just keep getting softer and better and more comfortable. And hey, with Valentine's Day approaching, this would make a great gift for both of you. All you do is go to cozyearth.com/DeFranco and enter DeFranco to get up to 35% off at checkout. That's cozyearth.com/DeFranco. cozyearth.com/DeFranco. And then in political news, let's talk about this Nancy Pelosi Gaza ceasefire Russia controversy. Right? And it all stems from Pelosi doing an interview with State of the Union host Dana Bash, with Pelosi being asked, are Democrats worried that younger voters, Arab Americans, and progressives might stay home instead of voting for Biden in 2024? And Pelosi responded by saying that she had been the recipient of what she called the exuberances of anti-war demonstrators. So arguing as a result that she knew the feelings they have, and adding,
but we have to think about what we're doing. And what we have to do is try to stop the suffering in Gaza. This is women and children, people who don't have a place to go. So let's address that. But for them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Mr. Putin's message. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected. to Russia.
And when Bash asked if Pelosi thought that some of the protesters were Russian plants, she responded,
Say their plans. I think some financing should be investigated, and I want to ask the FBI to investigate that.
Now, to be totally clear, right now there is absolutely zero evidence of what she's saying. But it is true. Russia has called for a ceasefire, but so have a ton of other countries. In fact, the U.S. is increasingly alone there, with there being 153 countries voting for a ceasefire at the UN back in December. So we're talking nearly 3 in every 4 members supported the ceasefire. In fact, only 10 nations voted against it, including the U.S. and Israel, and 23 abstained. And even that vote came in response to the fact that the U.S. had vetoed a nearly identical resolution days before. And so unsurprisingly, given the whole situation, Pelosi has gotten a ton of backlash for her comments. People arguing she's trying to undermine and delegitimize widespread calls to end the bloodshed. Some saying she's effectively calling for the criminalization of protesters. And that, including the executive director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, who described her claims as delusional and adding that her call for the FBI to investigate those protesters without any evidence is downright authoritarian. And so for me personally, I'm left just wondering why Nancy Pelosi would say what she said in one of the dumbest and most insane ways possible. Right? Because without a doubt, Russia is an election meddler. As we've seen in past elections, they want Americans divided. They want Americans at each other's throats for chaos to prevail. In short, looking at the 2024 election, Putin would obviously like to have a Trump presidency over a Biden administration. That American money for Ukraine, 100% confirmed, dries up. Easier for him. And while a Pelosi spokesperson later tried to clarify her comments, saying that from her decades on the House Intelligence Committee, the former speaker, quote, is acutely aware of how foreign adversaries meddle in American politics to sow division and impact our elections, and she wants to see further investigation ahead of the 2024 election, for her to say that people calling for a ceasefire, they are just repeating Putin's message, that's just fucking lunacy. Because for most people who want a ceasefire, when they find out, oh, Putin also wants a ceasefire, it's more of a the worst person you know just made a great point sort of situations. And it doesn't change the fact that while many people like myself believe that Russia would want to agitate the situation here in America, right? Put more gas on that fire. What Pelosi ends up missing, or at the very least appears to be missing, wording things the way that she did, is that there was already a fire. The call for a ceasefire is a majority popular opinion and movement in America. So saying that the people that are calling for it are just doing Putin's bidding is bananas. But hey, another day, another Democrat further isolating the party before one of the biggest elections of our lifetime. Cool. And then, y'all, as if things were not tense enough internationally speaking, 3 American soldiers were killed yesterday by Iranian-backed militias in northern Jordan. And on top of those killed, 30 more were injured at a remote base known as Tower 22, which sits at the border with Syria. Also, before you ask why America had troops in Jordan, they're an ally. We've had varying levels of troops in there for decades. Tower 22 seems to be an extension of that and likely provides logistical support to U.S. bases in Syria. But regardless, this attack is just the latest on U.S. troops in the region by Iranian-backed proxies. But the big key difference is that this didn't take place in disputed regions like Syria, and Americans actually died. So you don't need to be a geopolitical expert to realize, okay, not only did things just escalate, but this raises the political pressure on Biden, even if Iran is denying any direct involvement in the attack, especially as Republicans have criticized him in the past for not doing enough to these militias, with Republican Senator Tom Cotton saying he left our troops as sitting ducks, although many experts have said that is not a fair characterization. Hell, even Fox News reported that the drone accidentally got through the base's air defenses, with troops at the base thinking that it was an American drone returning from a mission. But then in addition to people like Cotton trying to assign blame, you also had him calling for war, saying the only answer to these attacks must be devastating military retaliation against Iran's terrorist forces both in Iran and across the Middle East. And then you have Representative Mike Rogers, who leads the U.S. Military Oversight Committee in the House, saying it's long past time for President Biden to finally hold the terrorist Iranian regime and their extremist proxies accountable for the attacks they've carried out. But as far as if we're going to war with Iran, that's unclear, with Biden using very specific language last night, saying we had a tough day last night in the Middle East, we lost 3 brave souls, and then going on to say that the U.S. shall respond, but understandably not going into further detail. And so as far as what that response will be, that remains to be seen right now. Though here, I would say, like, it gets a little muddy. Right? So, like, if Iran were to be the target, there's almost zero chance that we would officially declare a war. Instead, the U.S. would continue its decades-long practice of having an undeclared war. But also, as all of this is playing out, you have some saying, the Biden administration needs to take a more measured response, with Representative Seth Moulton, who served in Iraq for 4 tours, responding to Republicans with, deterrence is hard, war is worse, and saying to the chicken hawks calling for war with Iran, you're playing into the enemy's hand, and I'd like to see you send your sons and daughters to fight. We must have an effective strategic response on our terms and our timeline. Meanwhile, others, like Representative Barbara Lee, use the opportunity to say that this was a consequence of how Biden is handling the Israel-Hamas war, warning that it is spiraling out of control, saying it's beginning to emerge as a regional war. And you've got a number of people saying she might be right. Well, you have Israel continuing to say they're fighting Hamas and Gaza. It's also looking more likely that they're going to fight Hezbollah and Lebanon. And this is the same time as the U.S. and other countries are dealing with the Houthis and other militias throughout the Red Sea, Yemen, and Syria. And so with all this, you have people saying at the very least you could blame Iran, considering they arm, fund, and directly train these groups. And that's just if they're doing these things without Iran's blessing. blessing. Though you have Iran claiming that these groups are acting independently and they shouldn't be held responsible for their attacks, which is also why actually attacking Iranian soil would be seen as a dramatic escalation. Right? Unlike the Houthis and Hezbollah, Iran actually has the weapons that could affect